Determination. Let's just skip the introductions and get right into it, shall we? If you haven't watched or need a refresher, in the previous video I argued that determination is the power to change fate. We explored how determination enables us to alter events in the weird route, and how it is likely that at least some of determination's properties in Undertale still hold true in Deltarune. There was actually a property of determination I failed to mention in the last video. If a monster's dust is spread onto an object, and that object is injected with determination, it seems that object can then be brought to life, having the deceased monster's memories. We only have one example of this, and that example is Asriel being resurrected as Flowey. Why do I bring this up? Well, before I get into that, let's first talk about determination's properties in Deltarune. Alright, so what do we know? Determination is needed to create dark fountains. That's it. Since that's all we have to go off of, let's instead talk about dark fountains themselves. Alright, so what do we know? We know dark fountains are made using determination. A dark fountain can be created when a sufficiently determined enough lightner pierces the ground with a sharp object. Dark fountains create dark worlds, and these worlds are based on the location which the fountain was opened. And finally, the darkness inhabiting each dark world are real-world objects brought to life. I'd like to touch on that fourth point real quick. Is there anything in Undertale like this? Well, yes. I'd argue that Flowey is very similar to this. A flower injected with determination being brought to life is very similar to dark fountains, something created from determination, bringing objects to life. It also seems that darkners do not have souls, which is very similar to Flowey. Interesting, isn't it? So with this in mind, I'd like to take a look at what properties of determination are shared across both games. Determination is the power to change fate. Well, after the last video, I'd say both of these games have this property. Being with the most of it can save and load. This is unclear. We can't say for sure yet whether determination still plays into saving and loading in Deltarune. Humans naturally possess it, and monsters only possess small amounts of it. This is firmly in the no category. Queen was going to use Noelle, a monster, for her plan to open more dark fountains. Wouldn't make much sense to use a monster for this plan if monsters can't hold much determination. Besides, we see Berdly nearly open another fountain. While Queen isn't exactly all-knowing when it comes to dark fountains, I mean, she had no idea what the roaring is. But I think we can accept her stating that all lightners possess the power of determination. You can revive yourself. This is also unclear. We really have nothing to go on to put this in the shared category. Monsters can be brought back to life. It's also unclear if determination in Deltarune still has this property of being able to bring monsters back from their fallen down state. Perhaps we'll find out if/when Rudy Holiday dies. Now for the final one. Using determination, you can open dark fountains. Okay, this one's obvious. Nowhere in Undertale do we see references to dark fountains. No way this one can be shared. Nowhere in the game is there any reference to darkness growing, to something getting darker, yet darker. Okay, fine.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
Okay, I'm bored. It was inevitable. It's time to discuss him. Our good friend Wingding. As a disclaimer, this next section assumes you know who Gaster is. If you somehow do not, or just need a refresher, here is a very, very basic description. In Undertale, W.D. Gaster was the previous royal scientist, a scientist who supposedly created the core, and who one day mysteriously fell into his creation and vanished. If you truly do not have any idea who this guy is, I'd encourage you to watch Misty Sparkle's video explaining Gaster, or any of the other dozens of videos online talking about this guy. Anyways, back to Dark Fountains. I'd like to bring your attention to entry 17. Let's read through it together, shall we? Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? What does any of this mean? Well, it's very likely what's being described here is a dark fountain or something involving a dark world. I don't think it's a coincidence the word darkness is used. Something so heavily tied to dark fountains and Deltarune in general. Darkness growing, shadows cutting deeper, photon readings being negative. You know what this sounds like? This sounds like a dark fountain. When we first open the closet in chapter 1, doesn't it look like the darkness is growing? And I don't know about you, but isn't this what you would think negative photon readings would look like? Anyways, Gaster is inherently tied to Deltarune. At this point, entry 17 has literally been directly quoted at least twice by both Sham and Queen respectively. And I think this entry describing an experiment involving a dark fountain makes the most logical sense. Okay, so, if Gaster in Undertale conducted an experiment involving a dark fountain, what would he need? Determination. How would he have gotten it? Is there anything to suggest that he at any point acquired determination at all? Well, let's think. How did Alphys acquire it? For that, we'll need to look at Lab Entry 5. She got them from the human souls. This is blatantly stated to us. But I'd like to bring your attention to this line. Those blueprints likely being for the DT extractor machine we see in the True Lab. But using the blueprints? The existence of blueprints implies that someone else in the past needed to extract determination for something. Alphys is the royal scientist. The most obvious person who would have created these blueprints would likely be her predecessor, who is none other than Gaster. So if Gaster made these blueprints and needed determination for something, the question is, what is that something? Well, let's put it all together. We know that Gaster needed determination for something. The one place in Undertale we actually see him speak is Entry 17, where he describes what seems to be an experiment involving a dark fountain. Dark fountains in Deltarune require determination, so I would wager that he needed determination to open a dark fountain. If you are still not convinced or need further assurance that Gaster's experiments involved the dark fountain, then let me bring your attention to the core. If you take a walk through the core, you may notice these things off to the side. What are they? Let's look through the files and take a look at the sprite name for this thing. SPR_Darkness Totem. Darkness Totem? What an interesting name. I think these things being called Darkness Totems are further evidence that Gaster, the guy who created the core, likely did at least some experimentation involving a dark fountain or dark world of some kind. I think the constant reference to darkness makes it hard to ignore Deltarune, a game centered around going through dark worlds and sealing dark fountains. So now after all that, let's go back to our chart. I think with all of what I mentioned in mind, we can place determination being used to create dark fountains as a concept shared by both games. If we're looking at our chart, you may notice a lot of things fall into the no/unclear category. It is important to keep in mind we have only experienced 2 out of 7 chapters in Deltarune. I have a strong feeling that we will begin to see more shared properties across both games as the story progresses. Remember, in Undertale, we learned a lot of what we know about determination very late in the game. I would be shocked if this was all that was shared in terms of determination across Deltarune and Undertale. We will just have to wait and see though as the future chapters release. Before I continue with everything else I have to say, I would strongly encourage you to subscribe and leave a like on this video. It would show you want to see more stuff like this in the future. Alright, now that's out of the way, let's proceed with the video. There was one thing I failed to mention regarding Berdly in the last video. There's actually a third outcome for Berdly. So the first outcome, he ends the chapter alright. Living, breathing, alive, completely unscathed. Second outcome, if you go down a weird route, Berdly is left in a comatose state, having most likely fallen down. We covered this in depth in the last video. Now finally, the third outcome. During Queen's second battle, if you don't loosen Berdly's wires and instead choose to fight, Berdly will attempt to pull the wire off all by himself. What this results in is Berdly being electrocuted and injuring his arm. And upon returning to the light world, he realizes he cannot move that arm at all. Interesting. This is something that happens indirectly because of our actions, and this feels important to me. Losing the ability to move an arm doesn't feel minor. And as an aside, we do know for sure that Berdly will appear in future chapters because of the 2024 holiday newsletter, where it's shown he has dialogue in chapter 4. I'd also like to point out, in the scene where Berdly breaks free of the mind control, he does so all by himself without help from us. Through his sheer will and determination, he powers through Queen's mind control and gains his freedom. He loses an arm because of this act, causing a new outcome to occur. Interesting, yet another instance of someone being determined enough to do something and causing a change as a result. So what do I think? What schizophrenic conjectures may I possibly have? Well, for one, the Berdly lost arm outcome is an instance of our actions actually mattering outside a weird route. If we choose to fight Berdly in any of his battles or choose to fight Queen, then he loses his arm, something indirectly because of our actions. If I were to speculate a little bit, if Deltarune being a game that tells the player that their choices do not matter, I think an obvious message the game would try to portray to its audience is that your choices, no matter how big or small, matter. I don't envision this game's message being something along the lines of, it doesn't matter what you do, everything ends the same. Feels a bit cynical, don't you think? I feel the more obvious narrative message would be to show that even small choices in our lives can have serious implications on the ones around us. To me, it would be a little bit strange to have all these small differences that you can cause ultimately not mean anything. And it doesn't really make much sense from a game development perspective either. If these choices ultimately mean nothing, it's just extra work on the developer. I doubt these differences that we cause, big or small, will ultimately mean nothing. Just thinking about my own life, There's plenty of times I can think of that I made a decision that seemed small and inconsequential, and that decision ended up hurting someone else. Obviously not to the extent of making someone lose their arm, but you get the idea. So my best guess for not the message of this game, but a message, is that your choices, no matter how big or small, matter. I don't think these choices will cause drastically different endings. If I had to guess, it'd likely be similar to the neutral ending in Undertale. In each variation of the neutral route in Undertale, you fight Omega Flowey, get a phone call, and the game ends. The only real difference in each neutral ending being the phone call at the very end. The choices you made determining how happy or sad that phone call may be. And I feel we may end up with something similar in Deltarune. I mean, Rowsley does say to us that a happier outcome may occur if we choose to spare enemies. I don't think drastically different endings will happen outside of proceeding with any potential weird routes, but I think you'll be able to influence how happy or sad the ending to this game may be. If you want an analogy, it's kinda like going through high school. The end is the same, you graduate, but it is your choices that determine how pleasant that experience may be. You can form connections, join clubs, spend time with your friends, or you can do the opposite and isolate yourself, having a much worse time. Okay, that massive tangent aside, how do I think determination will progress in future chapters? Well, we have not one, but two cases of someone having enough determination to alter things. Firstly, us the player altering Berdly's fate in the weird route, and secondly, Berdly freeing himself when we choose to not loosen him from Queen's grasp. Again, a character losing their arm does not feel minor whatsoever, especially considering that we know this character will appear at least one more time in the next few chapters. If I were to guess, in the next few chapters, we will continue to be presented with opportunities for us to change things through our determination, perhaps seeing other characters do the same indirectly because of our actions. Having more opportunities for us, or other characters, to determine the course of events. Now, one more thing. This is completely schizo territory now. I have a firm belief that Rudy Holiday will die. We know his Undertale counterpart, yes, he does have one by the way, is dead. The state he's currently in Deltarune is not great to say the least. I have a feeling his condition is going to worsen, eventually to the point that he either falls down or passes away. Assuming that monsters still turn to dust, I have a strong feeling that Noelle may be determined enough to change things. Remember Flowey in Undertale? What if Rudy Holiday could be resurrected the same way? Having his dust spread on an object, and then opening a dark fountain, with that object then being brought to life and possessing his memories. Let's remember something else, by the way. Queen believed Noelle to be determined enough to create a dark fountain. Would something as major as her father dying not be enough motivation for her to open up one of these dark worlds? And if she does end up doing so in a future chapter, this to me would be a prime example of seeking to change someone's fate. In the last video, I described some parallels in terms of determination across Undertale and Deltarune. There is another parallel I'd like to bring your attention to. In Undertale, Alphys's goal with the determination experiments was to achieve freedom from the underground. Determination was being used as a means to achieve freedom. Now let's think about the weird route in Deltarune. As I discussed in the last video, if we are determined enough to force the game to bend to our will, then we can achieve freedom from our set path. Undertale and Deltarune have plenty of parallels between each other, often reflecting one another in interesting ways. Determination is a power that allows us to influence the course of events, to change fate. In Undertale, through saving and loading. In Deltarune, to make choices that matter. One final thing I'd like to mention is that it's no mistake Toby Fox decided to bring this concept back from Undertale. With its careful omission from the game, he could have easily chosen not to bring the concept back in Deltarune. A concept like determination is too big to bring in from Undertale and not share properties across both games. But yet, he chose to. I'm not saying there won't be differences, but there will certainly be things shared across both games. If you've made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video in any way, I would highly encourage you to subscribe and leave a like and comment down below. It would go a long way in showing me you want to see more content like this in the future. And if there's any other topics you'd like me to cover in the future, feel free to leave a suggestion down in the comments below. Even if it is not Undertale or Deltarune related, I am open to any suggestions. And with that, video done. Bye-bye.